down here.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the rerun that we were supposed to have 3 months ago. We got froze out. Everybody had been sliding down the hill to get in here that Friday night, I think. But we're glad you came tonight for some very important information. Last October, for those of you that may be new to West Conroe, and by the way, welcome to those of you that are joining us on live stream as well. But as part of our Generous Life series, I told you we were going to give you some tools to help in your stewardship life. And part of that is this workshop tonight. And this was one of the tools that I mentioned to you that we were going to have. And there will be others coming, other types of tools coming down the line. But the things that we're going to be talking about tonight are so important. You know, as a pastor, I meet with families all the time who've lost a loved one. And I hear so many times when I go to meet with them, Pastor, I've never been through this before. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. What do I do? So you're gonna learn that tonight. And then also as well, you want to make sure that you're prepared for your family in case the Lord calls you home, that they don't have all kind of problems and legal difficulties and red tape trying to be able to survive and pay the bills and do all those things. So you're going to get all that information tonight. So by the time you leave, here's an extra benefit you didn't know, but you all are going to be qualified estate attorneys and certified funeral directors. So if you need another career, you'll be ready for it when you walk out the doors. Both of our speakers tonight have been a real help to my family, to me and Diana, and they have helped us do all that kind of preparation that, you know, sometimes we don't want to talk about, we don't want, you know, but we got to be big boys and big girls because life here is not going to be forever. So let me start us with a word of prayer. Here's our format tonight. So Mr. John Donche is the estate attorney. He is officed here in Conroe on River Point Drive or Boulevard or whatever it's called. And he's going to go first, and then I think most of you, if not all of you, know Steve Reeves. He's one of our members, but he's not a funeral director here. He's a greeter, and he's a valet car parker and all those kind of things on Sunday mornings, and he's going to go second. So I've asked each of the speakers to speak up to 45 minutes. Some said, I'm not going to take that long, but I want to have a Q&A. I want you to be able to ask questions after they get through. And we're going to let Mr. Donche go first. So let's open with a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunity today to serve you. And God, we recognize you've called us to be stewards, good managers of the resources that you give to us, good stewards of our families, to take care of our families. And Lord, that's the whole purpose of this workshop tonight. And I pray that it would, that we would learn, we would be informed, we would be equipped or know what to do to be equipped. And I thank you so much for John and Steve and Chuck, for them coming here tonight to present to us. And we pray you'd bless them and use this time to the fullest. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, give a big warm West Conroe welcome to Mr. John Donche.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me up there okay? And I'm set? Everybody can hear me okay? All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to come out and speak with all of you about some very, very important things that should be dear to all of our hearts, and taking care of ourselves and taking care of our families. And I will say that since the cancellation of the first session that I've had an opportunity. I've been called by several people from the congregation and just overwhelmed by how wonderful people you have in a congregation. And certainly my thanks to Pastor Jay for having me here tonight. So it's a Friday night. It's nice outside, and you're all here. So this better be good, right? So I am an estate planning attorney. I do probate work as well. My focus is elder law, which means that it's estate planning geared a little bit more towards folks who have a few years under their belt and particular issues that can come up. But the same principles apply to younger folks as well. And I guess how we'll structure this is I'm going to talk about some of the things and documents you need while you are alive so that people can help take care of you. I will also spend a little bit of time talking about wills or trusts and things of that sort. And then these guys get to wrap it up with what happens farther on down the road there. I had 3 handouts. One was a green sheet, and that's titled Essential Living Documents. So I'm going to talk about that first. I have a stapled one that's called Wills, Common Trusts, and Other. Okay, and if you didn't get them, I've got some more down here. And then because I've got a whole box of these other ones, it's about Medicaid, eligibility rules, and nursing home things. But the reason I brought it is starting with the second page, okay? It's based on myths about Medicaid. And so take those home, read them, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that you've heard about before, and I can hopefully clarify some of those things. So I'm going to talk about the green sheet first, okay? And I'm going to try and go through that fairly quickly. But if there's a burning question, I'm happy to take a question if I'll be able to hear you from here. But I will make sure that I leave some time for some questions and answers at the end for you. Okay? We doing okay so far? Nobody's eyes are rolling in the back of their heads yet? We're good. Okay. So essential living documents are those documents that are part of an estate plan. Usually people come to see me, they're talking about their wills, or that's really the focus of what they're thinking about. But usually a estate plan really also includes several documents that are considered these living documents. And the first 4 are pretty essential. The last 2 depends on family dynamics. And the first one I want to talk about is the financial power of attorney. That could end up being the most important document, including a will, that you might have or should have to make sure that your loved ones or whoever you have in your life is able to help you when you need help with financial matters. And that means getting access to bank accounts, being able to get access to an Apple ID, Google ID, being able to talk to an insurance company if someone needs to find out about benefits, be able to pay bills for an individual if they can't pay them themselves. It's those kinds of things. In the state of Texas, there's a standard one, which is called the Statutory Durable Power of Attorney. It's about 4 pages thick. It can be downloaded from the Estates Code, and attorneys use it all the time. As an elder law attorney, though, there are some things that aren't in that document that can become very, very important. So I'm going to mention those to you. So if you do look at getting that type of a document from, if you want to see me about that or you want to see somebody else about that, but there are some pretty important concepts that could be in there. The financial power of attorney can either be effective immediately when you sign that thing, or it can go into effect farther down the road if you're incapacitated. And people start thinking these things as, I'm giving up power somehow, or I'm giving up authority somehow, and you're not. What you're doing is you're authorizing somebody to act on your behalf for you. You can fire them at any time. It's kind of interesting. You have to have capacity to sign the document, but you don't have to have capacity to fire somebody and revoke it, okay? But, and it is important that you only use individuals who you trust. But the thought of, if you're going to wait till you're incapacitated, let's see, I'm going to let this person have access to all my stuff, and I don't even have the capacity to know that what they're doing if they're doing something wrong, doesn't seem to make sense to me. I think you should always make sure that that document is effective immediately. Certain concepts in a power of attorney are such that it's supposed to be arm's length dealing. So you're dealing transactions for this individual that you're representing, and you're doing, you're a fiduciary as an agent, you're doing things in their best interest, and it's arm's length. Well, sometimes that isn't quite what the circumstance dictates, and that's where sometimes you really need to think about what's in that document. In a situation where there is a husband and a wife, and one becomes incapacitated, sometimes it is important to be able to transfer assets from the incapacitated person into the well spouse's name. You can't do that with most powers of attorney. That's kind of contrary to public policy. It needs to be in the document that says that, yes, it's okay to transfer stuff to myself. A lot of times in that document, there's going to be a section that says it's okay to give my stuff away, gifting. And usually the standard language says that it's okay as long as it's not more than the federal exemption for gifting, which right now is $16,000. Well, sometimes if you have to move assets because you have an incapacitated spouse, you may be looking at some kind of a financial arrangement for the house, something called a ladybird deed, which I will touch on a little bit later. But any of those things are a transaction that could be a pretty big transaction, and it could be a pretty big gift. And that's why it's important to actually, I think, to authorize your agent to make gifts on your behalf. Another thing in the financial power of attorney, sometimes they're structured in a way that it's one person who's your agent, and if something happens to them, then it could be a second person and a third person. And one of the things that Pastor Jay kind of mentioned that makes you start thinking is that people think they've got, I know who I want my executor to be, I know who I want my agent to be. What happens if something happens to one of them first? You want to be thinking in terms of backups on all these documents, making sure that, yeah, I have this person who's my spouse or my mother or my son to be the agent, but if something happens to them, do I have a backup? Because the thing is, with the power of attorney in financial matters, if someone does become incapacitated and can't handle their own affairs, and they don't have a power of attorney, can't do anything. And that means going to court to get a guardianship. And that is a road you just don't want to go down. It's extremely expensive. You establish a relationship with the court system. You're accountable to the court system. So it's really important to have a real strong power of attorney. One of the other little variations in a power of attorney that's important to know is that instead of having that just one person, then a second person, then a third person, sometimes we set it up so that it's multiple people. And an example I've given is my mentor. She and her husband went on a cruise. They had their documents together. They took them all with them. They got on a ship. They went to New Zealand. And well, he had had a spinal tap before they left, which became infected. Off the boat, into the hospital. They lived in New Zealand for about 30 days. They had all their documents, but they were each other's power of attorney. There was nobody at home that could handle paying the bills, taking care of those things they hadn't anticipated not being home to take care of. So in my own, what I've done is say, okay, it's my wife and our oldest daughter. Either or. If one can't handle it, the other one's authorized to handle it. So those are some of the things that are really important, but a financial power of attorney is very, very important. Medical power of attorney, that's the next one. A medical power of attorney is only effective if you can't make your own decisions, okay? So it doesn't, nobody else can go down and start telling the doctor what to do for you. If you've got your capacity, you can make your own decisions. You make your own decisions, not the person on your document. But if you are incapacitated, very important to have, again, if you can, a primary person, a secondary person, maybe even a third person. And in the case of the medical power of attorney, I don't suggest saying that, yeah, it could be either or kind of a thing. Or sometimes people say, oh, I've got 3 kids and I want all 3 of them to have equal. You don't want a doctor having to try and get a hold of all 3 kids. You don't want them having to have a disagreement in front of the doctor. The doctor wants to know, who do I go to? And if that person's not available there, then who do I go to? So that's what's the most primary concern and thoughts around a medical power of attorney. The next one's called a HIPAA release. Health Information Portability Accountability Act. I think that's what HIPAA stands for. It's not a decision-making document. It's a document that gives access to information. I prefer to do them as two separate documents because in the case of HIPAA, it can be used even if the person isn't incapacitated. In other words, I want all my kids to be on my HIPAA release, so if I end up in the emergency room and they want to know what's going on with Dad, they can call the hospital and say, what's going on with Dad? Well, who are you? Well, I'm on the HIPAA release, and I'm entitled to get medical information. It means they can get any medical information also, so sometimes, it's sensitive stuff. You may not want somebody on that, but it is an important document. And since it is not a decision-making document, sometimes they'll get structured so that the individuals on the medical power of attorney may be your 3 kids, or however many you have. But on the HIPAA release, as it turns out, it's not really your 3 kids that are going to be the ones that are available to take you to the doctor and help you out, but their spouses. So sometimes it makes sense to put a spouse on that document also and add them too. They're not going to be making any decisions. They just have access to the information. Now, am I losing anybody with their eyes rolling in their heads yet? No, okay. The fourth one is the physician's directive, and that's also sometimes known as a living will. And with that document, it's a statutory document, so it's provided by the state of Texas. You're initially and telling doctors and hospitals whether or not you want extensive measures taken to keep you alive in the event that you are either terminally ill with less than 6 months to live, or you're alive only because of mechanical means. And again, remember that you are, as long as you've got capacity, you make your own decisions, okay? This isn't like an automatic kind of a thing. But it is the document that is used to provide something to hospitals and doctors to know your wishes, whether you do want to be maintained at all expense, whatever, or if you want to say, no, I just want to be kept comfortable, I want to be hydrated, I want to have some vitamins and nutrients, but don't do anything heroic to keep me alive. This document isn't the best, it's not the easiest thing to work with always, okay? In all honesty, and particularly with this COVID, it's really made me kind of think about it a little bit more than I used to. It used to be kind of like, oh yeah, you got to have one of those. In some states, the forms are palliative care, and they're multiple pages and multiple issues, and you can say yes, no, yes, no. The Texas form isn't that way. It's as I kind of described it. Do you want extensive measures taken if you have 6 months or less, or do you want every measure taken? And a lot of times that included no ventilators or no feeding tubes, right? But with COVID, as it turns out, boy, those ventilators, a lot of people were on those ventilators, and that's how they survived it. So my recommendation with that particular document has been lately is the doctors and nurses that I go to, they always say, do you have one? And I say, yeah, I have one. And they say, well, would you give me a copy of it? And I say, sure, but then I don't. And they never ask me again about it. It's the kind of document that I want to know that I have it. I want my family to know that I have it. And if they ever need it, because they think it's time to pull that plug, this is where that document is, and you pull it out then. The next 2 documents they kind of depend on what your family circumstance is. And the first one is called the Declaration of Guardian. So a really good, thorough financial power of attorney is strong enough, if it's strong enough, can handle just about any financial thing that can happen in an individual's lifetime, okay? But if I decide that I like cats and I want to collect about 40 or 50 of them around the house, and I decide it's more important that they eat instead of me, and my kids come over and say, oh my word, what is Dad doing? Dad, it's time. We think it's in your best interest if we move you to a facility or somewhere where you're going to get better care. And I say, I ain't going nowhere. okay? A power of attorney is not powerful enough to make somebody do something. Because again, you are, with the power of attorney, you're just their agent, you're facilitating for them. In order to make somebody do something, that takes a guardianship. And as I said, it's an expensive process. You really don't want to go down that road if you can help it, but sometimes it's a necessary thing to do. And in the statutes, there's a logical pecking order of who an appropriate guardian is. So that if someone files for it and they're a spouse, the judge is going to say, yep, you know, as long as you look like you can handle it, that's good. And if it's not a spouse, then is it a parent? If it's not a parent, it's a sibling, and on down the line. Well, if you're thinking of a cousin, a friend, or somebody that's not in that pecking order, then this document is very, very important, because that would give that person a document that they can take to court and say, Your Honor, I know I'm not the brother, I'm not the husband, I'm not whoever, but I want to be the guardian, I'm qualified, and here are their wishes. The other real good purpose for this document is if you've got 3 kids, and one or, you know, number 1, number 2, okay to be guardian, but number 3, no way. Then you need this document also, because it can specify who is eligible and who is not eligible. So that's why it kind of depends on a family dynamic. Not real common that people need that document, but those are the circumstances in which they would. And then the last one is the appointment for agent for disposition of remains. It's kind of like the declaration, right? If it's a couple, I think the funeral folks will do whatever pretty much that the surviving spouse is going to direct them to do. When it's the 3 kids there and they're all arguing, well, mom said she wanted to be cremated. No, she didn't. She never would have said that. Yeah. Now they say, uh-oh, you guys go get yourselves a court order or something else. So if there is a possibility that there's going to be issues, and maybe even you may have an opinion that maybe it's just a good thing to have all the time, but a document that says this is who, first, second, third, or whatever, of who has the authority to make arrangements on my behalf. That is the only document of these that survives death, is the agent for disposition of remains. A HIPAA release is actually good for 2 years after death, in case someone has to go get records. But at that point, these documents, when a person passes, these documents I'm talking about, they're all null and void for the most part. And now we're looking at, okay, what do we do now? Well, now we start getting into testamentary documents and a will, a trust, or what other means there may be for handling an estate. So I'm going to kind of go into the second one. If you didn't get it, it's called wills, common trusts, and others. There's lots of ways of handling an estate. How many of you think that when a person passes, you have to go through probate? Does it have to? No, not necessarily. That's just a tease to, you know, kind of get some interest going there. So when we have stuff and we pass, somebody's going to get that stuff. Or in my case, our kids have said they're going to hire a dumpster and it all goes in the dumpster. But if there's any good stuff in there, the question becomes, did you make any arrangements for that stuff that could avoid a probate? Because what probate is it's the process of going through and making sure that what that person's wishes were are followed, okay? So if you've structured everything so that there is no question, there may not be a need for a probate. So if you have bank accounts that are held as joint tenants with rights of survivorship, husband and wife, even with kids, and someone passes, that money is theirs already. When you call the bank, so, you know, mom passed, I'm a co-owner of the account, you say, okay, things just keep right on going, joint tenants. If you have a retirement account, an insurance product, whether it's a life insurance product or an annuity, pension plan, and you have a beneficiary designated on it, that's who it's going to go to. When you pass, you contact that organization directly. You fill out their paperwork, you give them a death certificate, they're going to send the money to you directly. There's no need to go through probate for that. Usually what came down to being probate assets were the house, the car, and maybe one account. There are techniques for passing real property so that it's not subject to probate. With vehicles, about 3 years ago, there's a law that got passed in Texas that you can actually have a beneficiary designation on a vehicle. Now, it's not joint tenants, rights of survivorship, and if you go to the county offices, they may want to give you that form, but there's a form now that is for a beneficiary. So you fill out the form, you send in the title, you get new title back, and at the bottom of your title, it says, these are the beneficiaries. So take that in along with the death certificate to the county offices, and they'll re-register the car. So with some planning, it's possible to avoid probate entirely, okay? Another way is if you set it up so you're not the owner when you pass, and usually that's done by setting up some kind of a trust. A trust is an entity that is created. It is an entity that the trustee actually owns whatever you've put in that trust, but the trust owns it. So if you pass and it's in a trust, the trust document says what happens when you pass. This is who becomes a trustee. The trustee then, the next trustee is supposed to distribute or whatever they're supposed to do, but there's no need for a probate. You don't need to prove to the rest of the world who it belongs to. Does that make sense? Okay. So if we haven't put beneficiary designations on everything, and we haven't set up a trust, then hopefully we have a will. Because what happens then is we say, okay, well, I have a will, I don't have to go through probate. Not really. What happens there is that the will is given to the county or an application for probate. It's posted by the constable. It says, hey, one and all, this person's passed. They're probating a will. If you think that they signed a new one the next day, or you think they were loony as whatever when they signed that will, you better come forward now and contest that will, because we're going to consider admitting it to probate, meaning validating it. And then once that will is admitted to probate, then you either have letters testamentary and you have to appoint an executor to handle the estate, or there's another form of probate which is called a muniment of title, where you're just telling a judge, look, we don't need to we don't need to open an administration. We don't have any money to collect. There are no debts to be paid. We just need to make sure that the title of the house and the car and things are squared away, and then it's a more abbreviated proceeding. But that's kind of how a probate would work. Now, if you don't have a will and you don't have beneficiaries on everything, guess what? The state of Texas has a will for you. And if you're married and you have a couple of kids that are of the marriage, then it'll be okay. It's going to be more expensive to settle up your estate and figure it all out. But if the combination of siblings and children and the relationship of the deceased and marriage are correct, things will flow to the surviving spouse. If there is a child from a previous marriage or outside of the marriage, it doesn't go that way. People don't realize in the state of Texas, if there's a child from a previous marriage and they pass away and no will, no trust, no nothing, that child from the previous marriage inherits that half of the community property. Usually 3 or 4 people jump up and go running out the door and go make a phone call real quick. So in that sense, it's very, very important to, in that case, you've got to have a will or do something, but that's very, very important. Sometimes I'll have someone come in and husband and wife, mom's in to see me, dad passed away a few years ago, and the question comes up, we're talking about a house you own. Was it owned by both of you? Yeah. Did you ever probate your husband's will when he passed away? No. Did he have a will? No. Well, for real property, there's something called an heirship affidavit that can be used if that's the only thing that's out there. And with an heirship affidavit, to clear up title, it's an affidavit that's signed, that's created and signed by the surviving spouse or child or whoever knows who's applying and wants to get the item or the property. It's a history of their life, their marriage, their kids, and when they were married, when they were divorced, any previous marriages, that type of thing. And then you need to find two individuals who know the family history really, really well for a really, really long time. The longer, the better. And then they sign a thing that says that, yeah, everything in that affidavit is true and correct. That gets filed in the property records. And by law, after 5 years, a title company has to assume that it's correct. So sometimes that's one of the ways that we handle that. But in looking at the estate and doing the planning, it is very, very important to, again, think in terms of making sure you have the right people in the right positions, and understanding what their duties are as far as being an executor, if that's the case. Because it's easy to sit in my office and say, oh yeah, so-and-so will be my executor, and so-and-so could be their backup. Yeah, but did you tell them that that's what they're going to be doing? And do you realize what that all may mean? An executor is a fiduciary. They could be personally held responsible for the estate. So if they give out too much money to all the beneficiaries and they forgot to pay the taxes out of the estate, guess who pays the taxes? The executor can. Sometimes people think it's not that big a deal because probate in Texas actually is relatively simple from a lawyering point of view. But, you know, what else is involved with that? Well, who's going to clean out the refrigerator? Who's going to clean the stuff out of the closets? Who's going to feed the cats and the dogs? Who's going to keep those utilities going? Who's, you know, those kinds of things kind of are really the immediate things. So you really want to make sure that if you're going to name somebody to be responsible, that they understand and they've got an idea that it's not just the court stuff, but it's also handling the practical aspects. And sometimes we name our kids, and they're lucky if they've got, you know, an extra $50 at the end of the week. Who's going to, you know, they're going to have the money to initiate a probate process, keep those bills going, and things of that sort. So you got to kind of take that into account a little bit too, to make sure that there's funds available. One of the things that I'll suggest with that is, I mentioned earlier that you can have somebody on a joint account or as a beneficiary designation. Sometimes people will say, okay, I'm going to set aside a little bit of money, create a new account, put the kid on it. It's their money. They can go down and take it out right away. Or put it in an account and have them as the beneficiary on that account. It's going to take a little bit longer to get access to it, but at least that's a way of getting some money to those kids right away so they can handle some of those expenses. Where are we on time? 45 minutes, and then are we good now? Or I can take questions, or I can kind of talk about let me talk about the types of trusts a little bit, okay? Real quickly. That's on this wills, common trusts, and other. Revocable living trusts, that's the type of trust where you transfer everything you own into a trust. And a lot of people say that that's what they want to do, and that's where we start the conversation. But again, in some states, probate is so complicated that even if you have very little, you almost have to put it into a trust. Texas is not that complicated, but basically what happens with a trust is all your assets get transferred into that trust. You got to get new bank accounts, you got to get title to the car and stick that in that trust as well. Property, you got to deed your house into the trust as well, so you have to make sure all your assets are in that trust if you want to avoid probate and make sure that you don't have to go through probate. That's, a trust is one way. The good news with the trust is it avoids probate. It also will have language that if somebody becomes incapacitated, then it names the next trustee. Because when you transfer stuff into the trust initially, you're the owner, you have rights to take any of that money out, you're the trustee of it, but the beneficiaries are going to be kids or whoever, right? But it's a good vehicle because you can have language that says, well, okay, if mom or dad, kind of a doctor or two doctors say mom or dad can't handle the money anymore, take that letter to the bank along with the trust that they already have, because it's a trust account, and they'll say, oh, okay, well, I'm sorry to hear about that, but now we'll authorize you to start acting on their behalf. So it avoids some of the issues that there are with guardianships, and for capacity purposes, it may be a good thing. The bad news about trusts is not only do you still need a will and all the other documents, but you're going to pay for also having a trust document drawn up. And unless you're the kind of personality that's very diligent about making sure that they keep track of stuff, sometimes something gets forgotten and you end up with a probate anyhow. So when you set up that trust, you transferred everything into it, you transferred the car in it, and oh my God, look at that, that brand new car over there, 0% financing for 25 years, I'm buying it. You trade in your car and you get that new car and you're so excited about it, you forget to title it in the name of the trust. So there's your probate asset now. So you've got to be really, really diligent for a trust to really work out really well. But that's a good way of avoiding probate as well. Are there any questions out there for me? Oh, I'm not that good. Hi.
If you have a will, and the person dies, and you don't have to have it probated, do you have to do that what do you call that? That
Heirship.
Heirship affidavit?
So the question is, if you have a will and you've structured everything in such a way that you don't need to probate anything, then you don't need an heirship affidavit either. And thank you for mentioning that. So the way of passing real property without going through probate, I said I'd talk about that a little bit. There's two ways. One is called the Ladybird deed. Not a Ladybird trust, a lot of people call it that. And it's mentioned here in the handout, okay, a little description of it. And it's got nothing to do with Lady Bird Johnson. I was very disappointed to hear that. So what a Ladybird deed does is that I own the house, I sign a deed that gives that house to the kids, okay? And it's recorded in the property records. However, I have reserved for myself in that deed what has commonly been called the life estate, meaning I get to live there for the rest of my life. A Ladybird deed says not only can I live there for the rest of my life, but I maintain all incidents of ownership over this property. I can sell it, I can turn it into a liquor store, I could even sign a new deed and take it away from those kids. And if I don't and I die, it's theirs. So that's the good news. It avoids probate. And the history for that was around Medicaid and Medicaid estate recovery. When Texas implemented the estate recovery rules, houses are an exempt asset to apply for Medicaid and qualify for Medicaid. But when the person passed, if there was no surviving spouse, the state says, don't forget us, we're a creditor. You're going through probate, we're a creditor, you have to pay us back first. So that's a Ladybird deed. So the good news is it avoids probate and it helps protect that asset from Medicaid. The bad news would be if somebody that you named on that deed passes away first, it goes into their estate unless you have changed it, okay? Sometimes for people that's just fine. For some people, I don't like my son's wife, and I'll be darned if I want her to get it out of his will, right? Or something of that sort. So that's where you'd have to be a little bit careful with that. The second way is that the state of Texas, after Ladybird deeds came out about around 2005, came out with something called the transfer on death deed. And that's in the statutory codes as well. But the forms provided for that have been changed a couple times, and right now there isn't really a current form. A transfer on death deed is like a beneficiary designation. It's not a deed like I'm conveying something. It's more of a document that says, well, okay, if I die, then I want my wife to have it. Oh, but if she dies first, then I want this person to have it. But if they've gone too, I want this person to have it. So you can do all those kinds of things. But the bad news with the transfer on death deeds is that title companies are reluctant to insure title for about 2 years after the person passes. And the Ladybird deed, the title and policy follows that deed, whereas with the transfer on death deed, it doesn't. The other bigger thing is that with the Ladybird deed, it's a property transaction, so your agent in a good, durable power of attorney that says they can sell that property can sign one on your behalf if needed, or unsign one on your behalf if needed. With the transfer on death deed by statute, only the person who signed it can unsign it. So that gets kind of dicey with title companies. If you need to sell the house, mom's incapacitated, mom can't sign the thing again, and sometimes that can get to be kind of a problem with that. Okay, long answer, but thank you for asking so that I can talk about that.
Regarding the living will, is a do not resuscitate order a part of that, or is it a separate document? How do they work together? And I guess what you said surprised me, that you wouldn't recommend putting a living will in the medical system, in your medical record, your electronic medical records. But there might be reasons why you'd want to have a do not resuscitate order in those records.
Okay, great question. Everybody understand that. He's asking about a living will, but he's also talking about a do not resuscitate. Two very different things. They're not together in any way, shape, or form. The living will is an instruction to hospitals and to physicians. And the do not resuscitate is something that your doctor signs off on. That's posted at home on the refrigerator or on the bedroom door, so that if an EMT shows up, if you're going through a cardiac issue, the ambulance shows up, they see that and they say, oh, don't start doing anything. He didn't want to have anything done for him. And that one is getting to be a real interesting conversation too for folks. I've been to do a lot of networking kinds of things with a lot of different groups, and the thought of what the EMT has to do to resuscitate a person who's in cardiac arrest is pretty violent, as I understand it. And so they say that, if this individual is 85-ish or frail, that the damage that they do to revive them, get them to the hospital, but they've broken a rib or something, and the individual doesn't recover from that.
It's very easy to get put on medical devices. It's very hard to get off.
Exactly. But with the living will, you don't usually go running right down to the doctor and say this. It's usually, boy, this has gone on long enough. This individual didn't want this. I do have this document. And I guess it's just that sense of control versus it being in their file. And I'm just really more sensitive more of it because of the COVID and this business with the ventilators. That just concerns me, that a doctor might say, oh, we're not going to put a ventilator on it. I mean, it would have worked, but I've got this thing in the file that says they didn't want it. Yes, sir.
At what point do you pay taxes on an estate? Is there a dollar figure, $500,000, $1 million, $200,000? I mean,
great question. Taxes on estates, okay? So when a person passes away, the IRS is interested in two numbers. They're interested in the amount of lifetime giving that you made during your lifetime that they know about. And I'll segue slightly. Earlier we talked about gifts. Everybody says make it under $15,000. Don't have to report those to the IRS. IRS doesn't care. Over that amount, you have to file an extra form in your return that says, I gave this bigger gift, and the IRS now knows about it. So they're going to say, oh, we know that you gave away this much, and this is what your estate is worth. It doesn't matter what your probate estate in Texas was. They look at it as, well, the insurance policies that you had that went tax-free, and anything, anything on PODs and all that, that's all part of the federal estate. And at this time, if your estate is not, the limit on it is like about 11.6 million now. So, but it's changed. It's going to change again going up. I don't think it's ever going to go back to where it used to be, down to zero for 1 year. It was down to 600,000, and with the life insurance policy, it triggered it quite commonly. But so there's no tax in giving it to your beneficiaries. Your beneficiaries receiving it are not taxed on what they've received until they sell something and there's a capital gain on it.
the other question is there paperwork you have to file upon someone's death with the state of Texas, regardless if taxes are involved?
The thing that gets filed is they can talk about it, but is that they let the Social Security Administration know that you've passed. To my knowledge, that's the only real filing that is done officially until someone comes forward and files for a probate.
Do you mind talking just a little bit about the fees and the cost of this, and really from a standpoint of maybe not necessarily what you charge, but maybe what we can expect, and maybe if we're sitting down with somebody, when do we know to like, oh, this guy's charging me too much, or this is too good to be true on a price? So can you help us, like maybe what we would absolutely need to have, kind of maybe these first couple documents and like a will, what can we expect?
Okay. Do they have a diamond in their teeth? Do you see a Maserati in the parking lot? That's the clue number one. That's a great question, and it really does vary. I'm going to give you a lawyer-like answer and not answer your question specifically, because it depends on circumstances. How many of you take the Houston Chronicle? Anybody out there read it? There's a section in there. Ronald Lipman, he's an estate attorney, and he answers folks' question, and I've kind of, I always like to read and see what he has to say about stuff. And last time I saw him throw numbers out there that generally you're looking at somewhere around $750-ish to several thousand for a full estate planning package. I've never done several thousand.
We got several young couples in here. Say
Yes.
a word about how important for young families
Thank you.
to have.
I'm an elder law attorney, so I kind of go that way, but yes, but absolutely. The importance of the documents is no different for someone who's younger, okay? The same issues come up with a power of attorney and whether or not you're in a car accident, you've got COVID and in the hospital, or something that can come up where you're not able to take care of business and you have to rely on somebody else. There's nothing worse than having to call the insurance company and say, there's really been a screw up here. You guys didn't pay what you guys were supposed to pay. And the insurance company says, well, who are you? Well, you're not the insured. I'm sorry. Who are you? I've got power of attorney. I'll email it to you. I'll fax it to you. Then they'll talk to you. That's kind of on that level. In wills, a lot of times people, younger couples particularly, need to make sure that they make some kind of a provision and let their wishes known about who they would want to be the guardians of their children. Very, very important. Now, just because it's in that document doesn't mean that they will be the guardian. They have to come forward and apply for guardianship, as I talked about earlier, and there's the pecking order and stuff. But if they're in the will, there's a document for a judge to say, oh yeah, okay, I can see that you folks, even though all the siblings are fighting about this, that they really wanted you folks to be the guardian. Or in particular, sometimes people have close friends or somebody they went to school with that they would want to be a guardian, or a godparent that they would want to be a guardian who isn't a blood relative. And that is really, really important. And again, as Pastor Jay said, that when these things kind of come up, it's usually not the best financial time either. And one of the last things you really want to be doing is have hassles because you don't have some of these things in place, and coming up not only with the expense of the emergency, but having to try and come up with a solution to the problem. And a lot of times of all ages, people say, I'll let the kids worry about that. Well, that's really not the best solution. You really need to take care of that kind of thing. Yes?
I'm going to circle back to the DNR. If I was told even if I have one with the hospital, I need to have one at home for the paramedics.
So the hospital one is the living will. And you'll indicate whether or not you want extensive measures taken to keep you alive or not on that one, okay? That one stays in your drawer, you give it to the doctor. The DNR is a document that your doctor's going to sign. He doesn't sign the other one. Your doctor signs the DNR, and that's the one that's posted at home. And that is specifically for the EMT responding to a cardiac event.
So then there needs to be a second one that the doctor signs.
Yes.
Okay.
But you don't look like you need one.
Well, right. Also, I was told that even though I have one, they can still change their mind of what I signed. Is that correct?
You can always change your mind about anything you've signed.
No, like if the process happened that they were going to follow my DNR request.
On the DNR request, I don't know how they handle that because that's in the realm of emergency folks responding to an emergency at your home or wherever you are. But the instructions to them are if they see that, if it's a cardiac arrest, they're not supposed to try and revive that person. With the other document, it can depend. And sometimes you'll read or you'll hear a news article or see something on TV that someone has been trying to take care of, trying to enforce it for their family member, and the doctor said, no, we wouldn't do it. Sometimes there are some issues over it. But having one is a whole lot better than not having one and trying to do that.
Good answer. Good question. Okay.
Are we gonna, got another one back there?
Yeah. John, while I'm walking over here, because this is something you taught me and Diana, for young families or families with kids and that have grandkids, talking about beneficiaries, would you explain that per stirpes?
Oh, sure. So one of the decisions that you're making in a will is to say, okay, I give my stuff to whoever, okay? And in with that, you have to keep in mind that, okay, well, if something happens to my spouse, if there's a spouse, I want it to go to the kids. But then the next question that I ask, which you have to get into the thinking game, is that, well, what happens when something happens to one of your kids? Do you want the share of the deceased child to go to their children? Or do you want to say, nope, it's all first level kids only, and then after all the kids, if they're all gone, then it goes to grandchildren? I'm thinking, now I'm going to get their heads rolling in their head. Right? Is that kind of clear? Is that what you're thinking of, Pastor Jay?
Yes, and I know.
And help me out if I've forgotten something else that I know is important.
Okay, so what I understood you explained to us was that in the case of if Diane and I both died, and we say we want our estate split between our two kids, and we put per stirpes. So if our natural child, our daughter, dies, and she has two children, that her half of that estate would go to her children.
Right.
Not to her husband.
Right. So it's yes. So it's usually by descendants or adopted children.
Yeah.
The per stirpes means. Well, it's just a term that you learn how it works more than what it really means. But what it means is that if I have 3 kids, one has 1 kid, one has 2 kids, one has 3 kids, right? So if the one with 1 kid passes first, their child will get that whole share. If the one with 2 kids passes, their 2 children would share that share, and in the third child's case, it'd be split 3 ways. It could be also done so that it's by head, which is called per capita. Then you say, no, we count up the grandkids and they all get an equal share. But per stirpes is usually the typical way. It says, look, I leave it to all the so-and-so, and if they're gone, it goes to their kids, not their spouses, but it goes to their kids, unless you specify that, yep, I like that spouse is like a kid to me, I want the spouse to have it first. And then usually what will happen is there's a conversation of saying, well, look, if somebody is under the age of 21, somebody's under the age of 25, and they're inheriting, rather than go to that child directly, possibly being overseen by the surviving parent, who you do not want them to have that kind of money for that kid, it goes into trust for them, and you've selected your trustee in your document to be the person who would oversee those funds, so that it can be your other child who would oversee the funds for their niece and nephew rather than the surviving spouse.
I think we got time for one more question. I was given a question. What is the effect in Texas about common law marriage if one of the spouses, one of the persons die?
I thought I only had an hour to talk. Now we're into a conversation. Common law is recognized in Texas, and it's to the extent that the individuals have held out to the world that they're married. So if they go down to the bank and open up an account and say, yep, we's hitched, they'll open it up and that's treated as if they're married. But that doesn't mean that they're married for the house, or that doesn't mean necessarily they're married for something else. So it kind of depends on how they have broadcast that concept that they're married. So whoever's relied on it, yep, you're married for that purpose. It can get extremely messy, obviously. So the biggest piece, though, of advice, before I get off my platform here, is one of the biggest favors that you can do your family and do your kids in your estate planning, aside from the documents and everything else, is talk to these folks here and make sure you've taken care of everything. It's the biggest gift you can give them.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.
Sure.
Let's give him a hand, would you? So just as your pastor, I would say to you, don't try to figure out all this stuff on your own, okay? See a professional about that. Well, our second speaker is one of our own, Brother Steve Reeves, who is the manager of Kashner Funeral Home here in Conroe. So, Steve, you're... Oh, he's got it. Oh. Here, this is...
I got it. So, some of you may be confused because you've seen me at two different funeral homes in town, and I am over Metcalf and Kashner, so don't run out and change your plan from one place to another. I've brought Chuck with me here tonight to do some of this presentation because what we're going to show you tonight we feel like is important enough that we dedicate an entire team at our funeral home for showing this information to our community. We're going to kind of show you a presentation. Chuck's going to go through it, and then we'll talk a little bit about the legal side of what we get into, and then turn it into some Q&A and go from there. So I want to invite Chuck up at this time.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Pastor Jay. Now that I know we have a person that can park cars very well, I'll get to the office a little later than I normally do. So, anyways, yeah, that's great. So, anyway, thank you very much again for allowing us the opportunity to come in here. And my name again is Chuck Donna, D-O-N-N-A. It's Italian. My father was born on a boat on the way over. We were able to live the life of what America had given us, and we're very proud of it, and we talk about it all the time. When my father passed away, he had taken care of his arrangements, right? He took care of it for himself and for his wife, my mother, and took care of course, the casket, and took care of the funeral arrangements, took care of the cemetery arrangements, took care of the opening, closing, and took care of all the items, so that when my mother passed away, the family, the siblings, I am one of 5, we went in, we sat down, and my gosh, all we had to do was sign paperwork, right? And that was it, because they thought that much of us. They didn't want to put us through that stress, and it is a stressful thing. So I'm going to start out the presentation working with you by giving you a test. So we asked everybody to pick up one of these, right? If you've got one of these, open it up, please. And on the far left-hand corner, or the far left-hand sleeve, you'll see what's called Life's Most Stressful Events. This is actually a study that was done by University of California about 11 years ago, and they dug into the aspects of what caused so much stress in today's society. And there are 6 answers there, and I don't expect you to rank all 6, but if maybe you could take the top 3, what you think are, the ones that would be more prevalent, what number 1, number 2, and number 3. And that's out of loss of a job, personal injury or illness, death of a spouse, marriage, death of a family member, or divorce. Those were the 6 most stressful. Which do you think are the top 3? Just kind of think a little bit. Well, we're all Christian here. We can all be honest here. And who said, of course, divorce? No, what was the other one? Was the marriage. Who said marriage was the most spouseful? Which one? Nope, that's right. Actually, I have a tombstone on my other presentation. It's 2 of them pointing at each other. It says I'm stupid. If someone says that, I go ahead and put that one up there. So he didn't let me put that in here, but I told about it anyway. So no, it's extremely stressful, and it's stressful in 2 main areas. It's stressful emotionally, and it's stressful financially. And those are the 2 areas that we try to go. So I guess I can just wait to click to the next one, or? Okay, good. Yeah, so, the question comes up, what now? as a family service manager, my responsibility, and I have 4 family service counselors, is to go into the Conroe, Montgomery area, and we evangelize the need to do your pre-needs. And one of the reasons we do that, of course, is when we have families come in, it is amazing to us the difference, of course, is someone that has no idea what to expect, and then someone that has prearranged everything. I mean, the question comes up, what do I do now, right? Just like Pastor was saying, he gets the phone calls. I don't know what my next step is. These are some of the things that constantly happen with you on. We get a little bit further into it in asking people when they think about this, not to relieve the fact that what do they know? It's more to the fact of how would you like to be remembered, right? And there's a slide that'll come here in a second, and Steve will talk a little bit about it as well. But the importance there, of course, is that how do you want to be remembered? How did you celebrate your life? That's one of the aspects that you want to start thinking about more than just, do I want to be cremated? Or do I want to have a funeral, right? I mean, if you think about it, what's your legacy? When you have your grandson or your great-great-great-grandson come up and walking up to your monument, and you have your name and your date, that's good. At least he knows there was there. But what if you had that monument with a little bit more color in it, or maybe that monument with a little story about you? Again, how do you want to be remembered? I started my career about 8 years ago in this business, in particular at Earthman Funeral Homes down in Baytown, Texas. We had a lady who used to build birdhouses. She loved building birdhouses. When she passed away, her family brought all the birdhouses into the funeral home. Everyone left with a birdhouse. That's how she wanted to be remembered. We had a cyclist. He was head of the cycling tour that went around Baytown area, and he was buried in his cycle suit, all with a bicycle right next to him, right? All the gentlemen that are in the club, where they were all suited out, and they actually were the procession to go to the cemetery. Now, if you know anything about Baytown, there's one main road. It's Garth Road, okay? The cemetery to the funeral home's 5 miles. You can imagine the police and how they felt. All these people on bicycles going all the way to the cemetery with this gentleman. So, bottom line is there's different ways that you can plan this, and there's different ways that you can do it. But the question is, how do you start? And with the company that I'm with, of course, and with Steve with, our actual name brand is Dignity Memorial. Has everybody seen the green sign that says Dignity Memorial? You see it on the side of funeral homes and what have you. That's actually our brand label. Our corporation is SCI Corporation, based here in Houston. And they acquired Metcalf and Kashner about 10 years ago, just a little bit over 10 years ago. And we have now over 1,900 locations across the United States, and that'll be a valuable thing that I'll talk about here in a second. Can I have the next slide, please? All right, so Jay hit it, and John hit it too. What is it about this that's most important? It's about protecting your family. That's why we do this. We protect our families so that they don't have to go through the emotional and stress as well as the other area. The other area being, of course, emotional and financial. You think about it, we plan for everything in our lives. We plan to have our children go through college. We plan to go have vacations. We plan to go ahead and buy a house, and then we insure these things as well because they're so valuable. We want to protect them, right, so our family can continue to do this. Well, doesn't it make sense that if you're planning for something that you want to do that might happen, that you actually want to plan for something that will happen, right? Think about that. You put that priority and sense to you, and believe me, it'll help a lot when you start thinking about this. Go ahead, please. Thank you. This is an internal slide, and what I wanted to do is, today just kind of really hit the sharp areas, and then we can follow up with anybody that wants to do it. But these are the primary reasons people buy funeral plans in advance. And this is data that was taken from our customer base, as well as from our funeral directors, as well as some of the other people like ourselves and the family service counselors. The number one reason is to protect their family so that they don't have to make these hard decisions. All right, that's the number one reason. Number two reason, which is a little less prevalent, but to me these days is very prevalent, is the cost. Just like everything else, cost of funerals are going up, folks, and they're going to continue to go up. I have a slide I'll show you here in a little bit here. It's been about 3 to 4% on an average basis. But now, these days, we're now talking about 9%, 10% almost. Actually, it went back down, I heard this month, down to about 7.8%. But still, cost of funerals go up. The third one that was up there that we do, and the reason we do it is we take that financial burden off others, others being our family, all right? And that's so important as well. The last one, which always got me, is the fact that people buy because there's a promotion, because there's a sale on funerals, right? I mean, if that's the case, I'm going to get one of those signs and start twisting right outside here, you know, funerals are us. So anyway, next slide, please. So Planning One can protect your loved ones from, you know, having to make these decisions at a very, very stressful time. We see two people, our family service counselors. We see the people that we call at needs, okay, and that is they're in the time when they're at need and the family needs to see them. Let me ask, how many here have had to sit in on one of those initial meetings, the at need, where you're actually taking care of the funeral for someone that you love? So we got a majority here. You know what I'm talking about. You're in a daze. You're in a fog of war. You come in. You know what to expect just from what you've heard people, but you don't really know until you sit down there and you see what your options are. Options. That's what you have, is a lot of options. And if you know how to use them and how to work them for yourself and doing that in a pre-planning basis, it works out for the best for you too. You know, the other thing is that when you're that person sitting down there, and I don't know if this happened to other people that have just raised their hands, you know, you have this thought in the back of your mind, well, is that what they would want? You know? Was it blue coffin or gray? You know, what would they want? What would they want? What would they want to wear? All these little small, minute things that, you know, will keep you up at night when you have to make that arrangement the next day. And I've experienced it myself, of course, and I know what I'm talking about when this goes through. It's so much easier when everything's planned, all right? And I talked about the rising cost of final arrangements, please. Thank you. So what we've done as a company and what we're doing tonight is introducing you a methodology to be able to do this. And we're going to help you through these steps if you decide you would like to do so. This is a plan that was developed by SEI and has been from our funeral directors as well as our customer base as well as our family service counselors. And we have a 4-step process, which is very easy, which will allow you to get this process taken care of and do it right. The first one we call is reflection. The second one is recording. The third one is securing. And then the fourth one is sharing. Reflection, the fact that you're sitting here tonight kind of shows that you've been reflecting about it already, okay? And that's good. That starts that think process and what you want to do and what you want to take care of, right? And then I come back to what we started talking about earlier, you know. A lot of times people come in and the first thing they do is say, I want to be buried or cremated. And we say, okay, we understand that, but how do you want to be remembered?
If you'll notice, buried and cremated is on the bottom of that list. That's not the first choice. A lot of people think that is the first choice. Well, I need to decide whether I want to be buried or cremated. There's a lot of steps prior to that. How do you want to be remembered? You've heard the story about the dash on the tombstone. It's not about the first and last date, it's the dash in the middle. That's the celebration that we want to put together, and that's what we're asking you to pass on, put in writing so people know what that is. If you want to be buried, that's fine. If you want to be cremated, that's fine. But let's start with the celebration.
It is. That's the term. And actually, our corporation has changed this term in the industry. It used to be just called traditional funeral, right? It's now called a celebration of life, and that's what we do. I've got a video that's like 3 minutes on the front end of this presentation, which I didn't show, and I wish I would have. But you know, it talks about people leaving with a smile. People had a good time, right? And it's always nice to see those when that happens as well. This middle one there about what should your service say about your life is something that we'll continue to talk a little bit about here, but I talked about it earlier too. You know, what is it that you want to get across that was value to you that other people will know? All right, next slide, please. We're going to go through just a couple scenarios. We talked about burial, cremation. One of the issues that you reflect upon is what your services are going to be, like Steve was talking about. The other thing is burial or cremation.
well, what are you going to do with your final remains, right? Are you going to be buried underground? Are you going to be buried above ground? Next slide, please. These are typical examples. You saw the tombstones, very similar, that's out in the cemetery. These are called mausoleums. On one side, they'll have smaller spaces for urns to be put in there if you're cremated. Those are called niches. I don't know if everybody knows, but N-I-C-H-E-S. And then on these sides, you also have what's called the crypts, which are for the actual full-size coffins. There's crypts that are called tandem crypts because we put both people in, okay? And they're called head-to-head tandems because the first one goes in feet first, and then the second one goes in head first. Had one lady tell us the last seminar, God, I got to talk to him the rest of eternity. No, he just has to listen. Just has to listen, yeah. That's a good, there you go, Steve. Next slide, please. Then the mausoleum, that was an outdoor mausoleum. There are indoor mausoleums that you can go to as well, right? Very well air conditioned inside. Again, you have the same pattern. You have the crypts for the caskets there, and you have niches. But the niches inside the mausoleum, and I'm talking about our mausoleum in particular here, actually are light lit. Okay, they're lit, glass lit niches. And what you do is you put the urn in, but also you can go ahead and put mementos about the individual, photographs, for example. We have people that's brought in Mardi Gras jewelry and had it on there, and pictures and things like that. So one of the things I mentioned about earlier, you walk up to someone and that's passed away and what they leave behind. Boy, you get a really good picture on a glass front niche with an urn, what this person wanted to convey to you, right? Next slide, please. And then the other option is, this has just really started happening in the past 5 years, but these are cremation gardens. These are actually gardens that were built around for the surrounding environment that they're at, so they get all the local insects, they get all the, all the nice things that come with the Conroe and area. And they're put together, and this is just a private area specifically for cremains. And it makes it really nice as well. Next slide, please. So we talked about what are the different options above ground, below ground. Some of the questions that always come up are, well, can one of us be cremated, one of us be, have a traditional burial and both be buried at the same area? Yes, there are ways to do that. One thing I did want to say as well is when you purchase a space or when you purchase a glass niche or you purchase a crypt, you're not actually purchasing property. You're purchasing the interment right to be in that space, okay? You'll actually get a deed from the state of Texas and county of Montgomery. It says this is your interment right? So it works that way. So one of the slides that we had back says just because you're cremated doesn't mean you don't have to be memorialized, right? Or minimize memorialization. The next slide will show you what I was talking about earlier about promoting yourself. And this is who I was. You can tell by looking at this slide here, the gentleman definitely looked like he worked for the railroad. Probably an avid golfer, right? Definitely a veteran that was awarded. Looks like he took vacation with his kids in the T there and in his dates. So, I mean, he got to tell his grandkids and great-grandkids and great-great-great-great-grandkids everything about him in just one little picture right there. And folks, these days, all this is done with silver etching, okay, by laser point. You think this is something, we've got some in our cemetery, and you've probably seen them as well. I mean, you can get a photograph of an individual or a photograph of a ranch and have it on solid granite, even in color, okay? It's beautiful, some of the things that they do these days. It's beautiful. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about reflection. We got a lot into that, and of course, that's part of the process there. The second part of it is recording. You want to eliminate what you've thought about it. This is what you want to do. You want to eliminate how you eliminate them having to think what you wanted to have done. So what we've done as a company is we put together what's called a personal planning guide, okay? And one of the things we'll do is make sure everyone gets one of these, okay? Just let us know. We've got the
our phone numbers in the book here. We didn't have any to bring tonight, but what we'll be able to do is to bring these out with you. And I do ask that you let our family service counselors go through them, because they really work with you and try to help you. But the first 2 pages alone are the most important ones, I think, altogether. This first page right here is just important information. And we also have another form that we will give you along with this, which is necessary information, fills together. But this form in particular, all right, this is what the funeral directors will work on in order to get your death certificate started, okay? I got to tell you.
Know your mother's
Yeah.
maiden name or your parents' mother's maiden name. That's when we start going down that road and going back to the history, we get a lot of blank stares.
Yeah. And not only that, but some people try to take an educated guess, and guess what? They got it wrong, and guess what? You're going to be looking about another 4 or 5 months before you can actually get one, because now you have to correct what you've submitted before. And that's the government, okay? So this is a very valuable tool on this side, and that's specifically, as I said, for the funeral director to work with you. On this side, this is kind of like a 1-page brief about you that helps a funeral director go ahead and put together how you want to celebrate your life. What's your favorite colors, right? What's some of your favorite pastimes, right? What are your famous moments that you remember, okay? What did you learn from others? There's just little things in here that the funeral director will work with you, your family, and saying, okay, she enjoyed this, this, and this, and so this is what we can do for you with all the experience that we've had. So this is a wealth of book information. Inside, it helps put you the determination on what you want as far as your services. As Steve was saying, this is what we want to do, is try to get that taken care of as first. But there's important people to contact here in case you pass away, right? Or when you pass away. Not only important people, how about organizations that you belong to? You want to get them informed as well, right? There's even a section if you want to put financial information that some people do, some people don't in here. But altogether, it's a well thought out book that will help everybody. And then the last one, the family service counselors will go with you, is what we call the completing your final arrangement. This is our final arrangement wheel. And it tells you about everything you need to have done, okay? From the services to the opening and closing, to what's all involved, what costs are involved. They'll help you put that together to let you know what your options are. That's what the purpose of this book is, so that you can develop your own options as well. Do we have any veterans in the house? All right. I rolled my eyes up because I know why did I ask the question, you know. We also have a personal planning guide, and it's more of an information guide for veterans. We're very, very close to our veteran community here. We try to do as much as we can with them. This book was developed specifically for veterans, and what this does is tell you what your veteran benefits are. And I know most of the veterans here know, of course, that they have a burial plot that's awarded to them, given to them, as well as for their spouse, and also a monument at one of our national cemeteries. But did you know you also can get a funeral allowance as well? There are a lot of other things that we can go through with you on this and let you know what's available to you on this as well. There's even forms in here, and I used one of these forms myself. My father did have quite a few medals that he was awarded during World War II, but we never found them. We couldn't find them. I saw them on his DD-214, right? And so when we ordered it, there was an application just like there is to the government for everything else, right? And we got those medals. So there's an application for that in here. There's an application to get a flag, although we do provide a flag ourselves anyway to all our veterans as well. And then if some of you are wanting to go that route to the National Cemetery, there's a form that you want to fill out that you could go ahead in. It's not going to approve you right away, but what it does, it starts the process, and it doesn't reserve you a space, but lets them know that that's the direction you're going to go when your time comes, okay? And then one final thing on our veterans, we do thank you very much for your service and continue the way that you've done. We really do. Next slide, please. There's what we were talking about, the personal planning guide. Next slide, please. And then the veterans, right? Okay, so we've gone ahead and we've done a reflection. We've given you a vehicle to be able to record it, okay? Then the next thing is securing it. When you secure your plan, what are you doing? What's the first thing you're doing? You're locking in the prices. Prices cannot go up on you, okay? That's so important, right? And then what you're also doing is you're able to provide some of the convenient payment terms. A lot of people think that when they buy pre-arrangements, they have to buy it all at once. No. You can actually buy it through an insurance plan. And the insurance is like, for example, a 5-year. You pay into it 2 years, and God forbid something happens to you in the first day of the 3rd year, it's paid for. It's an insurance plan. There's a cost of insurance associated, and we'll show you those options and what you can do. But it's a great vehicle to get started in order to get your funeral plan taken care of. And then the overall objective, of course, is to ease the financial burden for those left behind. And so that's one of the areas that we go and we talk about when we go ahead for securing it. So our counselors will sit down. We have all this information in our computers, and you put in the numbers, and they'll let you know what all your options are from there. This next slide shows what I was talking about earlier as far as inflation cost. I actually started this slide back in 2020, but in 2022, this is very accurate. A full benefit funeral plan is about $13,000, $12,808. In 5 years alone, it's going to go up $3,000. And that's inflation rate at 4%, not that what's happened here. So I don't need to drive that part anymore, but I just, again, I'm letting you know this is what you're facing if it's not something you can get taken care of. And we talked about younger people that are in the audience right now. The fact that you're young, your rates are lower, okay, for the cost of insurance, because they determine it based on age and gender. And yes, men do have to pay more. So make sure to remember that. Yes, sir. Next slide, please. All right. So we've done the reflection. We've recorded it. And you know what? We funded it, or we're in the process of funding it. It's all set either at Metcalf, it's set at Kashner, and we've got cemetery here, and everything's planned. Guess what? It's no good unless you share it with everybody. You know, share it with your family. Take this book. Mr. Kashner used to have a saying. He said, take the book, put it in a double Ziploc bag, stick it in the freezer. It's the last place it'll burn. It's the last place somebody will take a look for it, right? And then actually the flood that we had 4 or 5 years ago, we actually had some refrigerators that were damaged, floating. Guess what was saved? These here. Give one of these to us, of course, or we'll give us what you select that you want us to have. We'll have it on file, all right? Give one to the pastor, your church. Give one to your financial advisors as well. I mean, there's so many people that you need to share this in so many different ways. You can share as much as you want, share as little as you want. That's the purpose of the pages being able to be torn out too. You can make copies and go from there. But I'm telling you what, the financial pages alone in this, I mean, we did everything on this. We've got the address, web address, and what your security codes are and everything. I mean, it's kind of sensitive to me to try to put this kind of information here, but if you're covering it, you're saving it, put it in the safe or in a freezer, as Mr. Kashner says. So, all right. So, you inform your loved ones of your wishes. You want to keep copies of your planning documents in the filing cabinet in your safe, and let your loved ones know what they are. The healthcare area as well, along with John's documents. I mean, that's would be the ideal thing. Go ahead. All right. So, of course, there are other funeral places in town. You don't have to go to Kashner. You don't have to go to Metcalf. Sorry, Steve. There are other options. You always have options. But I wanted to tell you what separates us from them, okay? And I do this purposely because this is the standing behind SCI Corporation and the wealth of the 1,900 locations that we have. First of all, we do provide the highest standard of service that you can, and we want to guarantee 100% satisfaction. That's not just lip service. If you have an issue with us or anything, let us know. We take care of it. We take care of it immediately. We are measured and scorecarded by J.D. Powers and Associates. So every time someone has a lost one in their loved, a loved one that they lose, they will get a survey from us, and they'll ask us how we did. Ask you how we did. Okay. The other thing we provide is protection away from home, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. We also provide bereavement, travel, and grief support. For a period of 13 months after you purchase one of your plans for us, on a bereavement travel, you can have your family or close friends call an 800 number for travel agency, and it's actually Carlson Litwit, which also does our armed forces, okay? And let's say you're planning a funeral, right? Well, they can try to get everybody together, come in on the same time, stay at the same hotel, help them with their cars. I mean, it's basically your own personal travel agency. And the key here, which was really interesting during COVID, people didn't do this right away. They waited 6 months, 7 months, especially with, cremains and being prevalent the way they are today. And so they would now plan a family celebration, right? A family reunion more so than just for a funeral area. So it continued the celebration of life. I just thought that was an interesting side note there. The other thing we provided for a period of 13 months is grief counseling. This is an 800 number again that's staffed by people that do nothing but help you with the grief situation that you may be having, okay? These are licensed grief support specialists. The most busiest times are between 1 and 4 in the morning, and guess by who? Teenagers. And it's amazing how much time they spend in the morning, even with grief at that point in time, okay? We also provide programs to loved ones when they've lost their spouses. Metcalf has been very prevalent with the LIFT program. I don't know if anybody here is aware of it, but Steve, maybe you could say a couple words about it.
So we have a LIFT program. It's designed for widow and widowers to come out and have lunch once a month. Right now they're doing it at Luby's. There's no fees to join. There's just a couple forms to fill out. And you come out, you have lunch with like-minded people that have gone through the same thing that you've gone through. It is not grief. You're notified usually 90 days after a passing, and it is open to anyone. You don't have to use one of our locations. All you have to do is contact us and let us know you're coming, and we'll make sure we have room for you. We're averaging about 50, somewhere around there, for lunch once a month. So
Great
it's just
program.
great to come out and get out of the house. Sometimes that's the hardest thing that a spouse has to do, is get back out in the public, because most of their friends are couples. Well, now you're the third wheel, right? So you don't fit in. It's just a great place to kind of get that start. And believe it or not, even though it's not planned, we've had 2 weddings over the last 8 years that they've met at the LIFT program. So.
Yeah, it's a fantastic program. And the lady that runs it over there, Tammy Byrne, she's just great with it. And they've gotten to a point now where we're also associating with other LIFT programs in the community as well, which makes it really nice. All right, the other thing is community education with licensed trained advisors. All our family service counselors are licensed to go ahead and talk about prearrangements in funerals. That's a requirement in the state of Texas, and this is what we do. We have different venues. We got community outreach. We just finished El Bosque this week down at the end of Montgomery. Some of you have seen those flyers. That's me, got them to send them out. So please attend anytime you want to. Our next one next month is going to actually be for veterans at Vernon's. So that'll be pretty cool. And so anyway, next slide, please. All right, away from home protection. When you purchase a funeral plan, you're allowed so many miles for the funeral home to come and pick you up. 50 miles to 75 miles, it depends on the funeral home, okay? Anytime it's over that, they're going to charge you mileage. Sometimes I think the average rate is about $4.50, okay? So if let's take an example, you're just going down to Galveston. Galveston's about 100 miles away. They would charge that additional mileage to go and pick you up. All right, so you go across the state lines, you go gambling again. Yeah, you got a little bit going on there with mileage. You may want to go visit your grandkids in Colorado, right? Well, now we're talking airfare to bring you back, okay? What this is a one-time policy. It's available to everybody. It's only $500, and wherever you are in the world, God forbid if something happens to you, we'll bring you back at no additional charge to the family, okay? Colorado, that example I gave you, $1,500 to bring someone home. California has been up to $2,000. Mexico, $8,000. When you start going over international, that's where it really hurts. A cruise, top of the line, right? How many people like to hear go on a cruise? $22,000 to bring your loved one back. Anyway, so it's away from home protection. It's what we do beyond the circle that's included with the agreement. Next slide, please. All right. This is Mr. Ziona Chiana. He actually passed away about 4 months ago, beginning of this year. And he has the world's biggest family. 39 wives, 94 children, and 33 grandchildren, right? Chuck, what does this slide have to do with funerals? Yeah, right. No, he's no longer alive. He died about 4 months ago. But what it has to do with it is the fact that we also have one provision that no one else in the industry has. We have what's called a child-grandchild protection plan. What that means is that if you purchase a funeral plan from us, whatever that plan is, we'll provide that same plan in case one of your children or grandchildren that are not married or under the age of 21 passes away. If you have 3 grandchildren, you buy a funeral plan, you're actually buying 4. Not only is this for your children and great-grandchildren that are under the age of 21 not married currently, but any future ones that you have until you pass away. Steve and I have seen people come in here and not realize that that was part of their package. And you talk about tears just coming out. It's just unreal. It's a blessing. It's something that you know, again, if you decide to get this option and try to get this taken care of, as everybody will or should during their lifetime, it's something that will help as well. Okay, sir? All right, so that's about it for us. One other thing I did want to mention, the packages that you purchase from us, they follow you wherever you go. So if you decide to move to Colorado, okay, your package will follow you. A funeral establishment up there under the realm of Denny Memorial will honor that. All right, so that's really important to know that as well. Not only that, but they'll honor it at the same price that you bought it here in Conroe, Texas. I can tell you their funeral packages are almost 30% more than ours, and it's the same package. It's the same components in each one. Woodlands, Denny Memorial Woodlands down here, they're actually a separate market than we are as well. They're about 10, 15% higher than we are. So you got a good going in Conroe, Montgomery here. So anyway, that's pretty much it. We just want to give you an insight into this, and we can ask and talk about some specific questions. I know that we were asked to talk about some. Why don't you go ahead, Steve?
Just to touch on a couple of things that kind of do with the legal side. So if you have a will, we have people come in and they tell us all the time, well, we need to see what the will says to know what they wanted to do, where they wanted to be cremated, where they wanted to be buried. Well, that's okay, but the problem is it's Saturday morning and the bank's closed and the will's in the safety deposit box. The next problem is I have a child over here that has a will and a child over here that has a different will. Now what do? So that's why we go by next of kin, whether it's spouse, children, grandchildren, and then it goes to parents, brothers, sisters. That's what we follow. So it doesn't matter what the kids want if the wife wants something different. It's just that simple. That keeps everybody out because wills are contestable. Next of kin is pretty hard to contest. Now, common law is recognized in the state of Texas, but especially for cremation, common law is not recognized for cremation because there's no proof if the children contest it of if they're really common law, because I promise you everybody that's has a girlfriend or anything and passes away, they all of a sudden are a fiance. So some of those legal things, we go to next of kin. Also, we talked about death certificates. You talked about you're going to need a death certificate to go to the bank. You're going to need that information. A doctor has 10 days to sign a death certificate. And then we have to order it from Austin. And depending on whether we have it mailed to us by UPS or we use snail mail, it could be anywhere from 10 days to 3 weeks to get a death certificate in your hands. That's why you want to have those funds available through the airship process to take care of those needs for not only for funeral services, but to keep the lights on. You don't know how many times that we have the spouse that's sitting there that has no clue what they're going to do. They have no access to funds. The spouse took care of everything. I couldn't even tell you what bank accounts we have. You need to share that information. We talked about what we need to do and how we need to do it. One question that comes up is, can I change it once I've made my selection? You can change anything you put down as long as it's you doing the changing. Now, the main concern is, I bought a funeral years ago for a burial, now I want to be cremated. Well, we can make those changes as long as the documents are not specific to cremation, unless you're the purchaser. And guess what? The state of Texas Department of Banking is the one that tells us what we can change and not change, because they control the money. If you purchase something on whether it's us or someone else, whether it's insured, it's written through an insurance company. That's so if Chuck decides to go on a cruise, he can't take your money and go on a cruise. It's secure. Same thing if you buy what we call a trust. It's put into a trust account. The Department of Banking controls that. We can't take your money out. If the funeral home closes their door, your money's safe. That's why they do that. How many in here want to be cremated versus burial? How many of you have a service plan before you're cremated? It's a lot of times I hear, he just wanted to be cremated. Okay, so we're either going to go out and bury you below ground, above ground. You might want to go scatter. Cremation is only the form of disposition. You're either cremated or buried. All this other stuff we've been talking about comes first. You need to have a celebration. I don't care if it's have everybody over for dinner, but you need to give your friends and family the opportunity to grieve, okay? That's human nature. And just because we decide that cremation's the new thing and we're not burying anymore, human nature hadn't changed. We have people that come in 6 months after they do a cremation, they haven't done any healing because they haven't talked about it. They haven't celebrated that person. So just food for thought, if you're going to be cremated, plan on having some kind of gathering. Doesn't matter where it is. I mean, we've gone to the park, go out on the boat, whatever you want to do, but give your friends and family the opportunity to celebrate your life, right? And one of the myths is, well, nobody's going to see me if I'm cremated. Well, we can. We can put you in a casket. You can have a traditional funeral. Instead of going to the cemetery, we'll take you to the crematory. Same thing. It's traditional service. So you don't have to say, well, nobody's going to see me. You can do the other way. I don't want anybody coming up and looking at me. You can have a traditional burial with a closed casket as well. That's why we spend time with families on an individual basis. There's so many options out there. We want to put it together to meet your needs. Part of that is knowing what you want to do, right? I can't stress enough what he's talking about to get your affairs in order before you get to us. So many times when people are grieving, they're not getting along with each other. If something's in writing, it's much easier for the entire family. Nobody's arguing over, well, what did they want? It's written down, right? At this time, we're going to open it up for questions, see if there's anything that we haven't gone over that we might want to answer. It's not a funeral. You can speak up, you know.
Scared them all.
How much cheaper is a cremation compared to a funeral for average funeral, like $13,000?
Well, so your cremation is going to be less expensive, but there again, it depends on what you want to put together, what type of celebration you want to do. I mean, we can put food together. Us Baptists, you know, we always want a good casserole, right? So it's really hard to say, oh, well, it's $5,000 less than a burial, because I have cremation that's the same cost. So we can sit down on an individual basis and go over that with you. A lot of people think, too, I don't have to buy cemetery property, and that's true. Some people take their ashes home and they put it on the mantle. Think about 50 years from now. Whose mantle is that urn going to be sitting on? We have them walk in the door. Hey, we found this in the attic, and it's got your name on it. What do we do with it?
True. I mean, we actually have a section in our cemetery for unclaimed urns.
So it's really one thing I want to touch on real quick. When you're talking about, some of you may be looking at parents, grandparents, a prearrangement can be declared irrevocable. Therefore, that money is not considered an asset dealing with Medicare, Medicaid. Right? So it can be done. It just means you can't cash it in, because if you don't have it irrevocable, it's considered an asset because you could cash it in. Any other questions? Scared you off, did we?
Mhm. So inside this pamphlet here,
She's got one back.
oh, you got one back there? Okay.
I just have a question. Interest rate on pre-planned funerals versus paying cash. Is it a high dollar interest rate?
So
Go
the
ahead.
funeral plans that are purchased, there's actually no interest rate. There is a cost of insurance, just like when you go and purchase a car, okay? You have the cost of insurance on it, that car. The company that goes ahead and says, okay, we're going to go ahead and fund this for your funeral to happen, takes an idea of what your gender is and what your age is, and based on what has happened with other people in that same area, give you a cost that's associated as a cost of insurance on there. So it's not a interest rate whatsoever. It's not specified. And sometimes it depends on the individual. It can be 2%. Sometimes it can be up 5%. It really depends.
What's the best way to get started? Do we just walk in the door or call,
And I'm
set an
sure
appointment?
glad you asked that.
Please don't walk in the door.
Yeah. Actually, inside the packets here, what we have here is an advanced planning worksheet. And I just put this in here so that you can get started with the thought and what have you. There's really 5 things you can answer up here, which is, you know, if something happened to you, unfortunately, on the way home, at least somebody would have an idea what we can get started. Inside also, I have our phone numbers. We have 2 phone numbers, right? Metcalf and Kashner. Just give us a call and say you'd like to make an appointment with someone to do a prearrangement. So that's all it takes, and actually do that also so that we can get you your personal planning guide as well. That's the way we'll get to that. So that's how easy it is. There's other resources besides us if you want to look into it a little bit more. If you go to any Dignity Memorial website and you go to the very bottom of the page, scroll down on the bottom, it says resources. You click on there, there's a wealth of information down there, and cremation versus standard traditional, all kinds of different things. But in direct answer to your question, the best thing we could do is just sit down with you, just give us a call and we'll set up an appointment.
The other thing is, real quick, don't be confused with, there's 2 sides to what you're doing, whether you're being cremated or whether you're being buried. One is the funeral or the cremation. The other side is the cemetery. We have some people say, well, I already own cemetery spaces.
Yeah, my dad took care of everything, right?
but their funeral hadn't been taken care of. So there's two sides to that, so be sure that everything's covered.
And, 20, 30 years ago, I mean, that really was it. I mean, I know my father, he had someone take him along the way how to get that taken care of. But back then, traditionally it was, do you have a cemetery space? Oh, okay, well, I got everything taken care of, right?
Okay?
Hi, I know you said that they had like the mausoleums where the two people can go in. How about cremation? Can you put both of them in one vase?
Great question.
And then maybe rent one, like if you did the glass one and had like the life of the couple.
So yes, we do have what they call companion, like glass front niches. We do have some urns that are designed for companion. In the state of Texas, we cannot mix and commingle, but they can be in two separate containers and placed in the same niche.
Or we also have an urn that has two separate spaces
Right.
that you can put cremains in, so you're still in the same urn together.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Steve. So I'm a little claustrophobic. I told Diana, I said, I want you to put me in a great big glass case and stand it up out in the middle of a field somewhere where I can see everything.
I thought you wanted to be over in Brenham at Bluebell.
There you go. Right outside the Bluebell factory. There you go.
We're going to do some extreme things with Jay and take him over to Bluebell, right?
I will tell you this. This may surprise some of you. If you're thinking about, well, where would I want to, if you want your ashes spread or buried, there's all those options. But if you want them spread, we actually have 2 or 3 of our former church members whose ashes are spread out in the prayer garden, and had the celebration of life out there. And
Very nice.
They just said they love that prayer garden, and can we have their ashes spread there? And I said, absolutely, you can. So there's 2 or 3 of our former church members out there.
So I would just close with one thing to tell you, whether it's cremation, especially during COVID, we saw a lot of this where we have to postpone services. We have a lot of families that say, well, we're going to cremate now and later we're going to get together and have a memorial. Life gets in the way. Plan it. You may plan it 6 months from now, but put a date down, because life's going to get in the way. And then what happens? I don't want to relive that.
Yeah.
So
That's absolutely right. I always tell folks, if you're doing a cremation, there's not as much, rush. You can take a little bit more time if you want to, but do make plans to do that. There is such a healing process in grief, and celebrating that person is one of those big important steps. That, in fact, Steve, just one of the things that we do, we have started really advising families. When I talk to them, it said, okay, Pastor, Dad died. We want to have the service here, and we do a lot of services here. And I always advise them. When my parents died, that's been back in the early 80s, the tradition then was to have a visitation the night before for like 2 hours. Mm-hmm. Well, that 2 hours usually turned into 3 hours. And, you're feeling like you got to entertain everybody. And, man, my brothers and sister and I were wore out, by the time all that was over. And then we had the funeral the next day and all that. And so I advise folks to adhere to a schedule similar to this. You can adjust the hours, but to do a visitation like at 10 o'clock a.m., have the service at 11 o'clock a.m., and then we have all of our life groups and stuff. They want to do a lunch in the garden room. And I saw somebody shaking their head. Nope, not 10 o'clock. Okay, so if you want it a little later, have visitation at 3 p.m., have the service at 4, and have dinner at 5. But the reason for that is the visitation thing is not going to go 3 hours. It's going to stop in an hour, and then you have the service. And so you don't wear the family out the night before, then got to go through the funeral the next day. And plus, when you have the lunch or the dinner, Carol, whichever one you want, there's a relief. The service is over. You can have like a family reunion and have a good time and fellowship and visit and tell jokes about Dad or whatever, you know. And it's a relaxing time.
There's actually, it's not really a trend at this point, but people are starting to do the burial first. Private
Yes.
family goes to the cemetery, does the burial, and then goes to whatever location and has the celebration.
Yeah.
That way they're not ending on that final, because honestly, the way we have it now is we celebrate and then we go to the cemetery and have that final goodbye. When you do it the other way around, you're ending on that celebration.
Yep, we've done several of those. Guys, let me thank y'all very much for being here.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I will just tell you from personal testimony, it is not difficult. I think I almost just walked in the door. Maybe I called Steve. I think I did call him and said, Dinah and I want to come in and sit down. But it was very easy, very relaxed. You're not pressured. You know, there's none of that kind of stuff. But they help answer a lot of questions that you don't normally think about, may not know. All right? I'll quit. Yep, James.
No, sir. You can bring your own in. We're going to give you some measurements, though. Because not for that, but I've had some people that have made their own, and I think that they thought the person was 4 foot tall instead of 6.
Oh, no. All right. Guys, let me ask y'all, if you would, go ahead and let me let y'all go out to
Okay.
the tables where you were. If anybody has a question, maybe they didn't get to ask, and they can stop and ask you. But thank y'all so much. Let's give them one more great big hand. Thank you so much. And we're going to let them get out, and then so they can be out there to see you if you want to talk to one of them. I think I'll pull your ears off, won't it?
Yeah, it did. That one.
All right, good deal. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope this was helpful to you. God bless you. Have a good night.
Thank you.